Welcome everyone to our GLSE Third Thursday Career Chat with Nana. Today we have Dr. Gregory Block, and he's going to be telling us about his career pathway and his journey and all the circuitous paths he took to get here. So Dr. Block is actually alumni of the University of Toronto, and he went on to do his PhD in the United States, and he's going to tell us about that trajectory. So without further ado, take it away.
Thanks, Nana. This is, I guess, not my first time joining you for this, but it's my first time doing this virtually. It can be quite nerve-wracking talking about your own career to a bunch of people who are going through the things you went through, I guess, way too long ago. But I thought for this discussion, I would frame it a little bit and really ask ourselves the question, what is a career versus a job? And let's press this as we ask questions and stuff like that, because I might just be totally wrong. But I think the thing that really distinguishes a career from a job is your job is something you do. It's a vocation. It's your skill set. You can be good at it. A career is a trajectory that involves the building of trust. And it sort of opens doors that are usually a bit elusive to plan for. And as I'll tell you through my relatively circuitous path, it's that trust that I built with people that I grew to love that really helped me get to where I am today. Today, I actually just started this new position in October. I'm the SVP of Corporate Development for Notch Therapeutics, which is an up-and-coming Vancouver-based startup in Toronto. Actually, all of the technology came out of the University of Toronto, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with. But I started out my career, I was a U of T alumni. I actually went to undergrad at U of T. I went in for fine art and was completely oblivious to the existence of science until artists really started annoying me. I ended up in the first cohort of the Gene Genetics and Biotechnology program at U of T, and then went to be a technician for a year in David Bassett-Jones's lab, where him and I came up with an agreement for me to enter grad school, and I joined the biochemistry program to start my PhD. In fact, I just saw Lindsay pop in. Yikes! Hi. We worked together in that lab many moons ago.
Hi, Greg.
Hey, catch up later. This is nerve-wracking even more now. So I was on the PhD trajectory in David's lab, and really enjoyed that environment. But the problem was I was in love with a girl across the hall, and working in Chet Taylor's lab. I proposed to her, and then she wanted to go to medical school, and she ended up going to medical school in New Orleans at Tulane University. And that was like an uh-oh moment. It's one of these, do I prioritize my career or life moments? And I chose to prioritize life. David told me I was flushing my career down the drain, and I went down to New Orleans in 2005, which, if you know your hurricane chronology, is not really the best time to go to New Orleans, and I started my PhD in a lab that I didn't know very much about at the time, but ended up being one of these, U.S. Leviathan labs with more funding than our entire department, and it ended up being a really productive environment, even with the disaster of the hurricane, which not only disrupted the start date of the program, but also everything during it and everything after it. So what started out as grad school at Tulane ended up finishing at Texas A&M University at the Texas A&M Institute for Regenerative Medicine. But it was a distinctly different experience than grad school in Toronto. It was a much smaller environment. It was a lot more hands-on with my PI, and ended up being pretty productive with a really strong publication record. That allowed me to, basically, again, follow my wife to do a postdoc. So she ended up going to residency at the University of Washington in Seattle. And after her and I had done a literally 8,000-mile road trip and 20 postdoctoral interviews at different universities, The one place I did not go was with her to Seattle, because it's in the far outreaches of the United States. And I was like, I don't even know where that is. And so she, of course, got in there. And then I had to restart my postdoc search. This is where I made an interesting career move that, set things in motion for decisions I would make later on, but in hindsight would probably not be the advice I give to people. The PhD was extremely productive in a large academic lab, huge lab, 75 people. I had a lot of support, from a technological perspective, and I had a bit of imposter syndrome. I'm like, I'm not a real scientist, I just had this incredible team around me. So I ended up joining a very small lab, where I was basically the first postdoc in the lab, and we were going to try build out the lab, and it kind of, smelled a bit like a startup opportunity, but it was enormously challenging. It didn't grow the way I would expect it to. The funding didn't come in the way I expected it to. I ended up bringing in my own funding and keeping the career afloat, and publishing pretty well, but it was not a sort of a very good environment. It really wasn't, my PI was not experienced enough being a PI to sort of launch an academic career, which takes a lot of nurturing from your PI. I had a development grant, which is one of those career grants from the Muscular Dystrophy Association, to go become a professor. And between myself and some family intervention, we all said, this is enough. This is nonsense. And I ended up, kind of at the pinnacle of depression and throwing my life away. And what do I do now? And I decided the way I'm going to get out of this rut is I'm going to enroll myself in continuing education for nonprofit management. And I'm going to go and I'm going to learn about how to run a nonprofit so that I can go work for an organization like the Muscular Dystrophy Association, or like a nonprofit. My research at the time was funded by a family office in Seattle called the Friends of FSH Research. And these guys had completely changed the way I thought about research. I entered that postdoc lab thinking about how I can twiddle around with things in the nucleus to make fun reporter assays, and left thinking about how I could cure patients. And we ended up setting up some of the first drug screening assays, high throughput screening assays for this rare disease. And it was pretty inspiring from like a human perspective. So I thought, that's what I'm going to do. And long story short, it's not even short, but I ended up leaving the lab in 2014, and I decided to, hold on, I screwed up my story a little bit. About 6 months into my postdoc, I realized it was a horrible, horrible mistake. And I then realized I was kind of trapped in the US because I was on a visa. And so I decided to go and apply for a green card, and which kind of forced me to stay in the lab for a while. And it was during that time that I found out that a company was starting from my postdoc's old mentor, that they were looking to start a company. And they tried to recruit me to help lead the commercialization efforts for that company. And I said, I would love to. And they said, that's great. Oh, wait, you're Canadian, you can't. So that got put on pause for a couple of years while the green card application came through. And then I finished this nonprofit management class and reached out to the only person I knew in nonprofit management in the muscular dystrophy space, which was a woman named Claudia Mitchell, who led an organization called the Limb-Girdle 2I Muscular Dystrophy Fund. And she said, I'm not going to be here that much longer. I'm actually going to be starting a company with David Russell called Universal Cells. And I was like, are you kidding me? I was supposed to help start that company. And she said, really? Well, why don't you come help start the company? And I said, okay. And she's like, great, you can be the VP of business development. And I said, okay. And so that literally happened at a coffee shop over a 3-hour conversation. And then I went home and I Googled business development, and I still do that when I come home to this day. And so what we did, I sort of started sneaking out of my postdoc to help start this company with David and Claudia, which ended up being an enormous success. But it took a long time. It was, there was a while there where I wasn't getting paid. Then we raised a little bit of money. Claudia raised money from her friends and family, and put $300,000 into the company. We got a direct to phase 2 SBIR grant from the NIH, which put $1 million into the company. And then, so they were able to bring me on half-time. And then I convinced Terry and Rick, who were my mentors and funders from the nonprofit in Seattle, to hire me on half-time. So for about 2 years, I worked half-time at this company called Universal Cells and at Friends of FSH Research as their scientific director. And that 2 years was completely transformative. I learned about, how to structure a business to have it be meaningful for patients. At the same time, I was working with
I think he's frozen. We will wait. It's the 3-hour Pacific time difference.
Hello?
We lost you and now you're back. Are you back?
I'm back. Zoom completely disappeared. How long have I been gone?
Oh, for about a minute.
Okay, where was I in history?
We're in history. How you were doing 50-50 at Universal Cells and Friends of FSH Research, and how you learned a whole bunch.
Yeah, and then we ended up doing a deal between Universal Cells and a company called Adaptimmune, which put enough money in the bank to bring me into Universal Cells. And that's when the snowball started rolling with Universal Cells. We built a number of partnerships, and we ended up selling the company in 2018 to Astellas Pharmaceuticals. Astellas had really bold ambitions to building a cell therapy franchise. And I had the opportunity to leave Universal Cells, one of 2 people at Universal Cells who left the company and joined Astellas. And I got to join the business development group in Tokyo. I didn't live in Tokyo. I lived remotely in Canada now. And spent the last 2 years or so working with the business development group, running transactions and leading strategic efforts for cell and gene therapy. And that came to a grinding halt in October when I made the decision. It was really a personal decision, given that my family had moved back to Canada and I wanted to be more involved in the Canadian ecosystem, to join Notch Therapeutics. Then pandemic. Now I'm here.
Wow, that's a very rich story. I'm going to take Q&A in the chat. So if you have any questions about Greg's story, then this is a great time to put that in the chat. So while students are thinking about questions to ask you, I'll just start because I always have tons of questions. So many of our students are currently PhD students, and they're thinking about whether to do a postdoc or not. And you mentioned that 6 months into your postdoc, you realized, oh, this is a bad decision, or it wasn't for you. So learning from that experience, what would you recommend to students that are considering postdocs, but leaving the door open to both academia and industry research?
Yeah, postdocing isn't for everyone. It's sort of like, it's the logical next step after your PhD. I think the biggest trap people fall into is what I call the super postdoc, which is when you end up postdocing in your PhD lab. And you become part of the team, but there's not really I would say a job trajectory for you if you don't manage to make it to that next level. The having a good idea of why you're going into your postdoc will allow you to have the discussions with your mentor on your career trajectory. If you're interested in going into industry, there are lots of advisors who have very successfully launched industry careers, and in Canada and in the US. And I would highly recommend looking for that track record of success, as opposed to new investigators who haven't quite established their labs yet. It can be a lot more challenging if they don't understand the career jump to industry. But nowadays, a lot of professors do. So you can find really interesting opportunities, especially if they're the type of professors that are spinning out companies all the time and, have connections in industry, or are working in something that is industry relevant. One thing that I distinctly remember when I was thinking about transitioning to industry and looking at, normal jobs and applying to jobs like at Seattle Genetics or, Amgen, I had done these massive screening campaigns on muscle cells, which were just enormously complex, beautiful assays. And I could have absolutely run a cancer screening assay with my eyes closed, but I didn't run one in my life. So it's like that match of jobs, it wouldn't go by. When you see a job application for industry and they're looking for something, they're looking for that thing. They're not looking for something like it or something that's tangentially related to it. They're looking for that direct experience to fill their objectives and goals. Did that answer your question in a million words?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Nick, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question in person?
Sure. Nice to hear your story, Greg. That's cool. So I guess my question is, how did you find the transition to like the business world, if you will? I think that a lot of scientists are scared of that, but should they be? Like, is it really as intimidating as some people make it seem?
I know. I would embrace it. It's like, you meet a lot of people that are just normal in business. There are aspects of it that are, incredibly intimidating. Like when you walk into a room of investment bankers and everyone's got their gelled hair and their clenched eyebrows and their blue suits, and you're like, oh dear, what have I become? But for the most part in this industry, a lot of people have their PhDs. A lot of people went through the same experience and decisions as you. So you meet a lot of extremely talented people. And when you see what they're able to do with the flame of industry behind them, sometimes I feel like academia is really designed to, find it trains you in case you discover the next CRISPR and then you can, do something incredible. But industry lets you, if you haven't achieved that in academia, industry allows you to do a lot and make the most of your career. I think it's fantastic. And I think it's something to actually look forward to as opposed to be scared of. The freedoms and stuff are a lot different. It's, there's very clear goals and objectives and accountabilities that just don't exist, as well as frameworks for how to organize your human behavior, which is very interesting to learn, and to learn how to treat people within governance contexts and how to make decisions and how to influence people. These things become really, it's a bit of an art. So you can't just do what you wanted like you did in academia, but it's not intimidating. It's fun.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah.
Well, just as an extension to Nick's question, if any of our viewers here, any of our students are interested in sort of the business development of science, but they're in an academic degree program now, is there anything they could be doing now to prepare for that you might recommend?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've been asked it a lot, and I don't know if I've ever answered that correctly because I did it backwards. But I think, I've interviewed a bunch of people. There is a career ladder to business development that's pretty normal. It involves really building your understanding of industry first. So I think from the bench, what you can do is start reading industry publications. There's a few journals out there, things like Bio Insights, and then a lot of business focused journalism like Endpoints News or Fierce Biotech, Xconomy, these type of things that are reporting on what from your PhD will seem very boring, but from the business development angle, it's competitive intelligence. Building an understanding of the landscape of what's happening, especially with respect to of where money is flowing and where investment interests are lying. This is the kind of thing you can do from your vantage point now. It kind of reminds me when I wanted to go into science, I just started reading. I actually bought myself a subscription to Nature, even though I didn't understand a word in it. And I just started reading. And it's the same thing. It's like, find something to read in the business realm and start understanding that. There are courses you can take on business development through some conferences. You might even try attending some more industry-focused conferences and developing a bit of a network. And understanding, I think, how people view business transactions and financing and news is kind of interesting and would give you a head start.
Okay, and then just to add to that, so that's business development. Are there any other skills that you would recommend students build during their graduate studies to prepare them for, I guess, any career, but just in general? What should they be focusing on? You know, we go through our PhDs and our masters, and it's about analytical thinking and strategic thinking. But what other skills would you recommend that students work on?
You know, one big thing that comes to mind is writing. When I look back at what I do now, it's the lessons I learned writing that helped me a lot today. Communicating is a critical thing in all aspects of business, not just business development. Business development takes it up a level and a half because you have to also be nice. But you know, communicating clearly in the industry setting is absolutely critical. And so practicing your communication skills, practicing writing, you know, I find those, you know, reading, writing, and arithmetic is what I'm teaching my kids now.
So then would you recommend, so how would you recommend them practicing their, you know, apart from publications, what other things would you recommend?
To practice writing, I have no idea. Blogging.
Blogging. Any ideas from students out there? Where can students work on their writing skills? If you want to write in the chat. At the University of Toronto, resources and settings that are here, where can students write to work on their writing skills? I know we have some biochem students, so you're going to know some of these answers. Same with immunology. Yeah, blogging is a good medium to start writing. U of T papers or grad school newsletters. Yeah, the departmental magazine for they've got Impress, right? Sick Kids has one too. Chat boxes. What
Practicing
else?
our writing right now.
Right, so biochemistry, we have a student blog called Transcripts. So the students, a couple of years ago, they realized, well, we don't have a cool magazine like immunology. Ashton. And so biochemistry came up with their own student blog called Transcripts. So if you don't have a place where you can write and you want to find a place, it could be within your own department and you just have to form that, right? Writing for charity.
iPhone has her hand up.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Greg. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat about your journey. I was just wondering, how does business development differ from a small biotech startup compared to an established pharmaceutical company?
Yeah, that's a great question. In simple terms, we distinguish it based on buy side and sell side, meaning that pharmaceutical companies are looking to buy things, and small biotechs are looking to sell things. I've had the pleasure of doing both. I'm not sure which I prefer. Actually, I probably prefer sell side on the small biotech. To put that in a bit of context, at Universal Cells, we were a small Seattle company that no one knew, and I had to go and convince large pharma companies or larger biotech companies to come and play with us. And then the fun part is, how do you structure that relationship so that it drives value for everyone, and it becomes a bit of an interesting puzzle. In large pharma, it's about driving consensus around an internal portfolio, and it's very difficult actually in large pharma because there's so many moving parts. And you have to interact with so many different functions, and even understanding what those functions do is a career in its own right.
Okay, that's very interesting. So are there like best practices, because you mentioned with your experience at Universal Cells, are there best practices that you employ for business development coming from a smaller biotech?
Coming from the that's a sensitive question. I think that when you're a small biotech and you're hungry for cash and you start employing people and that feeling of responsibility starts to air on your shoulders, you can get scrappy. The expectations become higher on a large pharmaceutical company, and it was really interesting in a large pharma kind of picture, like maybe there would be kind of like a Stanford prison experiment where suddenly you're the large pharma company and you start acting like the large pharma company, and you think you have this power, but it's not really like that. As a large pharmaceutical company, the business development people really put forth the face of the company and have a huge responsibility for their reputation. So making sure you do things like respond to people, treat them with respect, give them clarity as to why you made your decisions, and communicating in a way that when they make the advances that you need for your pipeline, that they actually come back and talk to you. So it's really, you have to be considerate and thoughtful. I found having the small biotech experience in large pharma was like a superpower, because it gave me a bit of empathy, which I could use to guide my way through conversations with small companies. And a good example of that was we were at Astellas, we were looking at a small company that had a technology that we really needed. They were going to run a Series A financing in an environment where a Series A financing capital was easy to get. And we had to convince them to, instead of raising their company and doing this all on their own, do it with us. And it was through that ability to tap into that entrepreneur empathy that I developed a relationship with the CEO. And we talked about our dreams, and we ended up buying that company for nearly $600 million, or over $600 million. So a massive transaction, something that was important to Astellas, something that was important to the small company. We brought it all together, and it was about understanding what everyone wanted. So it can get pretty complicated.
Thank you. That's very insightful.
So Greg, you talked about empathy a bit. Can you maybe talk to the students about how they grow that in a professional level? How do you work on that skill?
Well, that's a tough question. I think the thing is understanding, what the business constraints are, takes a little bit of time and really experience. So, a small company that's, coming out of the university has much different pain points than a company that's just run its Series A financing, which has a different pain point after, a company that has reached 100 people and is now, don't even know who each other are in the hallways anymore. So going through some of those pain points is just a learning experience in its own right. I think there's only so much you can read about it. But thinking to yourself when you're dealing with a small company on the other end of the negotiating table, like, do they have the capacity to even negotiate with me, or are they going to need help? Are they pretending to go to a lawyer, or are they just doing it on their own? And one of the things a good way to pick out a good pharmaceutical company when you're dealing with them is, like, if you put out a horrible term that's bad for you, and good for them, will they call you out and help you? And so, at Astellas, we did that a lot. Like, we would make sure the terms we put into agreements were really, fair. And sometimes the biotech company doesn't know what they're negotiating, because they don't have that experience of dealing with the large pharma.
Good points. Boris, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure, yeah, hi. Thanks for sharing your career path, Greg. I kind of was wondering if you could elaborate on the distinction between corporate development and business development. Because I've noticed, you might see both functions in an organization. I guess I've noticed with small biotechs, it's usually just at the higher levels, but then in big pharma, it seems like there's separate kind of teams, right?
Yeah, I knew someone was going to ask that question. I was really hoping no one would. So, at Universal Cells, I was the VP of Business Development, and I changed my title to VP of Corporate Development because people started using VP of Business Development in sales, and people thought I was a sales guy, and that really bothered me. business development in the context of pharmaceuticals is not sales. It's about this, it's about structure and consideration and building the future. Corporate development is more about developing the business so that the business is successful and poised for growth. One way to think about it is corporate development has business development under its umbrella. So for example, at Notch Therapeutics, where I'm in charge of corporate development, my three main remits are intellectual property, corporate communications, and business development, which is its whole entire thing on its own. And that encompasses things like competitive intelligence, negotiating, going to partnering conferences and telling the story, external facing stuff, internal facing stuff, and just making sure that that everything kind of goes together. In the larger pharmaceutical context, corporate development can encompass things like governance mechanisms, things like mapping out delegations of authorities so everyone in the company knows what their accountabilities are, what their budgets are, how much they can spend, how much they can approve, if they want to get something approved, who approves it, from which functions. So corporate development can get really nitty-gritty in terms of governance structures of these larger companies.
Okay, very cool. Thank you. Yeah, so I guess the deal making usually, if there's a distinction, kind of fall under business development then. If it was going to go,
business development and deal making, like like Trump and business development, that's not the same thing.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
So Greg, I was curious about your story with Notch. How did you land that role? Tell us that story.
Yeah, so this comes back to my first statement, which I think is about building trust and building networks. I think one of the challenges I had is, I was constantly changing geography. And so I was very conscious of that the entire time. And when I started at Universal Cells, I always knew one day I wanted to move back to Canada. And I would make an active effort to go down to U of T and say hi to everyone. I got to know the CCRM people really well. I met Emily in my first trip down in 2014 when she was at CCRM. I got to know Peter and Michael May. I got invited to become a member and an associate at Creative Destruction Labs, and I started building my networks there. I was actually under a non-compete because of our acquisition. So there was a period of time which I couldn't even look Peter and Emily in the eye without lawyers showing up. And but that eventually went away. And as I watched Notch grow, I got really excited about where they were going. They brought in a phenomenal CEO who's someone I really could see myself learning a lot from and growing with the company. So it was, it wasn't like, I applied for a job. It was kind of like a natural discussion that happened over a long period of time and involved many people at the company. And then there was a trigger point, that just was like, okay, now's the time. We're going to pull the trigger, and I did. But that part was more of like a life decision. Like, is this what I want to do? Because things at Astellas were quite great, actually.
And was that when you moved back to Canada? Was it while you were in Canada that happened, right?
That happened while I was in Canada. So I had actually moved to Canada from the US about 2 years prior. So, one of those things are like, hey guys, I'm moving to Canada. And everyone's like, you're doing what?
Well, welcome back home. We're very happy to have you back.
You know what? That was like buying a stock and watching it pop.
Yeah. So at this point, I'm going to stop the recording so people could kind of openly ask questions now. So for those that are watching at home, thank you for joining us. We're going to say goodbye to Dr. Block, and join me next month when I talk to Dr. Elizabeth Gregg from Eli Lilly. Bye for those of you at home.